Sarah, 26, standing in the empty master bedroom that once belonged to her beloved mother, staring at the vacant jewelry box that had been passed down through 4 generations of women in her family. The velvet compartments that once held her grandmother's pearl necklace, her mother's wedding ring, and the delicate sapphire earrings from her great-grandmother now gaped like hollow wounds. Across the hall, she could hear her stepmother Linda humming cheerfully while organizing her own accessories in what used to be the guest room. The sound made Sarah's stomach churn with a mixture of grief and rage that threatened to overwhelm her completely. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 hours earlier, Linda had casually mentioned over morning coffee that she had donated some old costume jewelry to charity, claiming it was just taking up space and collecting dust. But Sarah knew better. Those weren't costume pieces. They were the most precious heirlooms her family possessed, each piece carrying decades of love, tradition, and irreplaceable memories. The story really begins 2 years ago, on a crisp October morning, when I received the phone call that shattered my world into a million pieces. I was in my small apartment in downtown Portland, rushing to get ready for my job at the marketing firm where I had worked since graduating from college. The phone rang just as I was applying mascara, and I almost ignored it, thinking it was another telemarketer. Something made me answer, though, and I heard my father's voice, broken and trembling in a way I had never experienced before. Mom had suffered a massive heart attack while tending to her rose garden, the same garden where she had taught me to plant bulbs when I was 7 years old, where we had spent countless Saturday mornings discussing everything from my teenage heartbreaks to my career aspirations. She was only 53, vibrant and healthy, or so we all believed. The doctors later explained that she had a rare genetic condition that had gone undetected, a silent killer that claimed her life before the paramedics could even reach our family home in the suburbs of Seattle. The funeral was a blur of casseroles, sympathy cards, and well-meaning relatives who kept telling me that time heals all wounds. But time felt frozen that day as I watched them lower my mother's casket into the ground, taking with it the person who had been my anchor, my confidant, and my greatest source of strength and wisdom. Dad stood beside me, his usually strong shoulders shaking with grief, and I knew that our family would never be the same. My mother, Elena Martinelli, had been the kind of woman who lit up every room she entered. She possessed an infectious laugh that could turn strangers into friends within minutes, and she had this remarkable ability to make everyone feel heard and valued. She worked as a pediatric nurse at Seattle Children's Hospital, often bringing home stories about brave little patients who touched her heart. Even after 12-hour shifts, she would come home and cook elaborate Italian dinners from recipes her grandmother had brought from Sicily, filling our house with the aromas of garlic, basil, and fresh bread. More than anything, Mom believed in the power of family traditions and the importance of preserving memories for future generations. She kept meticulous photo albums, organized birthday celebrations that felt like magical events, and maintained a collection of family heirlooms that told the story of our lineage through tangible treasures. Her jewelry collection was the crown jewel of these heirlooms, carefully curated pieces that had been passed down from mother to daughter for over a century. The sapphire earrings had belonged to my great-grandmother Sophia, who immigrated from Italy in 1923 with nothing but hope and those precious stones sewn into the lining of her coat. She sold everything else she owned to buy passage to America, but she refused to part with those earrings, believing they would bring luck to future generations of women in our family. My grandmother, Maria, inherited them when she married my grandfather in 1948, wearing them on her wedding day and every anniversary thereafter. When my grandmother passed away, the earrings came to my mother, along with a string of lustrous pearls that my grandfather had saved for months to buy as a surprise for their first Christmas together. Mom added her own pieces to the collection over the years, including her engagement ring, a vintage emerald bracelet she found at an estate sale, and a delicate gold locket that contained a photo of me as a baby. Each piece told a story, carried love across generations, and represented the unbroken chain of strong women who had shaped my identity. Mom had always promised that someday, when I was ready, the collection would become mine. We would spend hours together, looking through each piece while she shared the stories behind them, explaining the significance of every scratch, every repair, every moment when these treasures had provided comfort during difficult times. She made me promise to continue the tradition, to add my own meaningful pieces, and eventually pass everything down to my own daughter. The weeks following the funeral were a haze of grief counseling, estate planning, and the overwhelming task of sorting through a lifetime of belongings. Dad threw himself into work with an intensity that worried me, staying late at his accounting firm and avoiding the house where every corner reminded him of the love he had lost. I took a leave of absence from my job and moved back home temporarily, hoping to help him navigate the practical aspects of life without Mom while we both processed our devastating loss. Dad had always been a gentle, methodical man who preferred spreadsheets to social interactions. He met my mother in college where he was studying business and she was pursuing her nursing degree.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Their love story was the kind that made you believe in soulmates, built on quiet moments, shared values, and a deep understanding that transcended words. They complemented each other perfectly, with her vibrant personality bringing out his hidden sense of humor, while his steady presence provided her with the security to pursue her dreams of helping children. For 28 years, they had been inseparable. Dad never looked at other women, never seemed to notice that his friends were dating or remarrying after divorces. He was completely devoted to Mom. And after she died, I honestly believed he would remain single for the rest of his life. He was 62 years old, comfortable in his routines, and seemed content to focus on his work and his relationship with me. That's why I was so surprised when, about 8 months after Mom's death, Dad mentioned that he had been talking with someone he had met at grief counseling. Linda Patterson was a widow herself, having lost her husband to cancer 3 years earlier. She was 55, worked as a real estate agent, and understood the profound loneliness that comes with losing a life partner. Their friendship began innocently enough, with coffee dates after their therapy sessions and occasional dinners at quiet restaurants, where they could share memories and support each other through the healing process. I was cautiously optimistic about this development. Dad had been so isolated and sad that any positive connection seemed beneficial. When he first introduced me to Linda over lunch at a family restaurant near his office, she appeared to be exactly what he needed. She was attractive in a polished, professional way, with shoulder-length blonde hair that was clearly maintained by expensive salon visits, and she dressed in the kind of tailored clothing that suggested financial success and attention to detail. Linda expressed appropriate sympathy for our loss and shared touching stories about her own journey through widowhood. She asked thoughtful questions about Mom, seemed genuinely interested in hearing about her work at the hospital, and complimented the way Dad spoke about their marriage. She mentioned her own daughter, Jessica, who lived in California with her family, and talked about how difficult it had been to maintain close relationships after her husband's death. During that first meeting, Linda was respectful, warm, and seemingly supportive of Dad's need to take things slowly. She acknowledged that she wasn't trying to replace my mother, that every person's grief journey was different, and that she was simply grateful to have found someone who understood the unique challenges of rebuilding life after such a profound loss. I left that lunch feeling relieved that Dad had found companionship, and hopeful that this friendship might help him rediscover some happiness. Over the following months, Linda became a regular presence in Dad's life. She would attend his work events as his guest, accompany him to weekend farmers markets, and gradually began staying over occasionally in the guest bedroom. She was always careful to maintain appropriate boundaries, asking permission before making small changes to household routines, and consistently expressing appreciation for being welcomed into our family space. What impressed me most was how Linda seemed to honor Mom's memory. She never tried to rearrange Mom's personal belongings or suggest major changes to the house. When Dad mentioned that he was struggling with decisions about Mom's clothing and personal items, Linda offered to help in whatever way felt comfortable, emphasizing that there was no rush and that these decisions should be made when he felt emotionally ready. The transformation in Dad was remarkable. His color returned, his appetite improved, and he began laughing again in ways I hadn't witnessed since before Mom's illness. He started taking better care of himself, updating his wardrobe with Linda's encouragement, and even planning small weekend trips to visit local wineries and art festivals. For the first time since the funeral, I felt like I was seeing glimpses of the man my father had been before grief consumed him. Linda's approach to our developing relationship was patient and respectful. She never tried to mother me or insert herself into family traditions that belonged to Mom and me. Instead, she created space for new experiences, suggesting activities like wine tasting or cooking classes that we could enjoy together without feeling like we were betraying Mom's memory. She was genuinely interested in my career, asked thoughtful questions about my goals, and offered professional advice from her experience in real estate. When Dad mentioned that Linda's lease was ending and she was considering purchasing a new home, he surprised me by suggesting that she move in with us instead. The house was certainly large enough, with 4 bedrooms and plenty of space for everyone to maintain privacy. From a practical standpoint, it made financial sense and would allow them to spend more time together while they continued building their relationship. I'll admit that I had mixed feelings about this arrangement. Part of me wasn't ready to see another woman living in the space that had been so completely Mom's domain. But another part of me recognized that Dad deserved companionship, and that Linda had been nothing but respectful of our family's history and traditions.
After much consideration, I agreed that a trial period might be beneficial for everyone involved. Linda moved in on a Saturday in early spring, bringing only her essential belongings and leaving most of her furniture in storage. She was careful to settle into the guest room and the spare bathroom, making minimal changes to common areas and always asking permission before adding any personal touches. She respected the family photos throughout the house, the way Mom had arranged the kitchen, and the small shrine of memories that Dad had created on the mantel in the living room. The first few months of this living arrangement went smoothly. Linda contributed to household expenses, helped maintain the garden that Mom had loved so much, and created new routines that didn't interfere with existing traditions. She was present but not intrusive, supportive but not presumptuous, and seemed genuinely committed to honoring the life that Dad and Mom had built together while creating space for new experiences. When Dad began talking about marriage after about a year of living together, I was cautiously supportive. Linda had proven herself to be a caring partner who made him happy without trying to erase Mom's influence on our family. She had never pressured him for commitment, had maintained her own career and independence, and consistently demonstrated respect for our family's values and traditions. The wedding was a small, intimate affair held in the garden behind our house, the same garden where Mom had spent countless hours nurturing roses and teaching me about the patience required for beautiful things to grow. Linda wore a simple blue dress and included Mom's photo in the ceremony, acknowledging the love that had shaped Dad's character and expressing gratitude for being welcomed into a family with such strong foundations. I served as Dad's best woman, standing beside him as he promised to love and cherish Linda, while honoring the memory of his first wife. It was emotional for all of us, but it felt right. Linda had earned her place in our family through patience, respect, and genuine care for Dad's well-being. She had never tried to compete with Mom's memory or demand that we forget the past in order to embrace the future. After the wedding, Linda gradually began making more significant contributions to our household. She updated some of the dated appliances in the kitchen, refreshed the master bedroom with new bedding and curtains, and created a small office space where she could work from home when needed. These changes felt natural and appropriate, evidence of a woman making herself genuinely at home rather than someone trying to erase another woman's presence. Most importantly, Linda continued to respect the family heirlooms and traditions that meant so much to Mom and me. She admired Mom's jewelry collection, often commenting on the beauty and craftsmanship of individual pieces, and she seemed to understand the emotional significance these treasures held for our family. She never suggested that they should be sold or given away, and she always spoke respectfully about the women who had worn them before. When I moved back to Portland to resume my career, I felt confident that Dad was in good hands. Linda had proven herself to be a devoted wife who honored his past while building a meaningful present. She kept me updated on his health and happiness, planned visits that allowed us to maintain our close relationship, and created an environment where Dad could thrive in this new chapter of his life. For almost a year, everything seemed perfect. Dad was healthier and happier than I had seen him since before Mom's death. Linda appeared to be thriving in her role as his wife and seemed genuinely committed to preserving the family traditions that mattered so much to us. When I visited home for holidays and special occasions, the house felt warm and welcoming, filled with love and respect for both the past and the present. That's what made yesterday's discovery so devastating and unexpected. I had come home for what was supposed to be a relaxing long weekend, planning to help Dad with some minor home repairs and enjoy quality time with both of them. Linda greeted me at the door with her usual warm smile and enthusiasm, asking about my flight and my work, seeming genuinely interested in my life and happy to see me. The morning had started normally, with coffee and conversation about Dad's recent doctor's appointment and Linda's success with a particularly challenging real estate transaction. Dad seemed relaxed and content, making jokes about his attempts to help Linda with her flower garden and sharing stories about their recent anniversary dinner at the restaurant where they had their first official date. It was only when I went upstairs to put my suitcase in my old bedroom that I noticed something was wrong. The door to Mom's jewelry room, a small space adjacent to the master bedroom where she had kept her collection, was standing open. This was unusual because Dad always kept that door closed, treating it as a sacred space that required intentional visits rather than casual browsing. Curious, I walked over to investigate and found myself staring at empty shelves and vacant jewelry boxes. The beautiful wooden display case that had held Mom's rings was completely bare. The velvet-lined drawer where she kept her necklaces contained nothing but dust. The small safe where she stored the most valuable pieces stood open and hollow, looking like a mouth frozen in a silent scream. My heart began racing as I systematically checked every compartment, every hiding place, every location where Mom might have stored her precious collection. Nothing. Every single piece was gone. The sapphire earrings from great-grandmother Sophia, the pearl necklace from Grandma Maria, Mom's engagement ring, the emerald bracelet, the gold locket with my baby photo, even the small silver charm bracelet she had started when I was born, adding a new charm for each birthday until I turned 18. Decades of family history had vanished without a trace. I stood in that empty room for several minutes, trying to process what I was seeing and hoping there might be some reasonable explanation. Perhaps Dad had moved the collection to a more secure location. Maybe Linda had taken the pieces to be cleaned or appraised. There had to be some logical reason why these irreplaceable treasures were missing from the place where they had been safely stored for over 2 years. With trembling hands, I walked downstairs to find Dad reading in his favorite chair in the living room. When I asked him about Mom's jewelry, his expression immediately changed from relaxed contentment to confusion and concern. He had no idea that anything was missing. He hadn't touched the collection since shortly after Mom's death, when we had inventoried everything for insurance purposes. As far as he knew, every piece should still be exactly where Mom had left it. Together, we returned to the jewelry room for a more thorough search. Dad's face grew pale as he realized the scope of what was missing. These weren't just valuable items that could be replaced with insurance money. They were irreplaceable family heirlooms that carried emotional significance far beyond their monetary worth. The stories, the memories, the connection to generations of strong women in our family, all of it had vanished. When we confronted Linda about the missing jewelry, her initial response was confusion that seemed genuine. She claimed to have no knowledge of any missing items and suggested that perhaps we were mistaken about where they had been stored. But when Dad explained the significance of the collection and the fact that it had been carefully inventoried, her demeanor began to shift subtly. After about 10 minutes of questioning, Linda's story changed. She admitted that she had indeed removed the jewelry from the room, but claimed it was for security reasons. She said she had been worried about keeping such valuable items in an unlocked room and had moved them to a safety deposit box at the bank without telling Dad because she wanted to surprise him with her thoughtfulness. This explanation might have been believable if she had been able to produce bank documents or keys to substantiate her claim. But when Dad asked for specifics about which bank and when she had made this transaction, Linda became evasive and defensive. She claimed the paperwork was at her office and that she would retrieve it the following Monday, but her body language suggested that she was improvising rather than recalling actual events. The conversation continued for over an hour, with Linda's story becoming increasingly complicated and contradictory. First, she claimed the jewelry was in a safety deposit box. Then she suggested it might be in her office safe. Then she remembered that she had actually given some pieces to her daughter Jessica for safekeeping. Each explanation required new details that didn't align with her previous statements, and it became clear that she was desperately trying to cover something much more serious than a simple misunderstanding. Finally, under sustained questioning from both Dad and me, Linda broke down and admitted the truth. 3 days earlier, she had taken the entire jewelry collection to an estate sale company and sold it as a lot. She claims she needed money quickly to cover some unexpected business expenses and had planned to replace the pieces with similar items before anyone noticed they were missing. The devastation in Dad's eyes was heartbreaking to witness. This wasn't just about the financial value of stolen property. This was about trust, about respect for family traditions, about the sacred promise he had made to preserve Mom's legacy for future generations. Linda had violated everything he held dear, and the betrayal cut deeper than any financial loss ever could. When I asked Linda how she could possibly justify selling items that didn't belong to her, items that she knew held irreplaceable sentimental value, her response revealed the true nature of the woman who had been living in our house for the past year.
She said that holding on to dead people's belongings was unhealthy, that Dad needed to move forward instead of dwelling in the past, and that the jewelry was just collecting dust anyway. Her casual dismissal of generations of family history, her complete lack of understanding about the emotional significance of these treasures, and her apparent belief that she had the right to make decisions about property that belonged to our family showed me that I had been completely deceived about who Linda really was. The respectful, patient woman who had courted my father was a carefully constructed facade designed to gain access to our family's resources and security. But Linda had made one crucial mistake in her calculation. She had underestimated my determination to protect my family's legacy and my willingness to fight for what belonged to us. Mom's jewelry wasn't just a collection of valuable items. It was the tangible connection to the women who had shaped my identity, the physical representation of love that transcended death, and the promise I had made to continue our family's traditions. As I stood in that violated jewelry room, surrounded by empty boxes and broken promises, I knew exactly who I needed to call. My mother's sister, Aunt Victoria, wasn't just any relative. She was a federal prosecutor with 30 years of experience, a woman who had built her career on pursuing justice for victims of theft and fraud. More importantly, she was someone who understood exactly what Linda had stolen from our family because she had her own pieces from the same collection. When great-grandmother Sophia died, Her jewelry had been divided between her two daughters. Grandma Maria received the sapphire earrings and pearl necklace that eventually came to Mom. But Aunt Victoria's mother, my great-aunt Rosa, had inherited an equally precious set of emerald pieces and a diamond brooch that had been passed down through their family line. Aunt Victoria understood the irreplaceable nature of these heirlooms because she was the guardian of her own family treasures. More than that, Aunt Victoria was someone who didn't tolerate injustice in any form. She had prosecuted white-collar criminals who thought their wealth and status would protect them from consequences. She had brought down embezzlement schemes, insurance fraud rings, and elaborate theft operations run by people who believed they were too smart to get caught. If anyone could help me recover Mom's jewelry and ensure that Linda faced appropriate consequences for her actions, it would be Aunt Victoria. Standing in that empty room, with Dad's broken trust weighing heavily on my heart and Linda's lies echoing in my ears, I pulled out my phone and dialed the number that would change everything. Linda thought she had gotten away with the perfect crime, stealing from a grieving family and covering her tracks with elaborate stories and fake tears. She was about to discover just how wrong she was. As the phone rang, I looked around the jewelry room one more time, memorizing the empty spaces where my family's treasures should have been. Soon, very soon, Linda would understand that she had messed with the wrong family. And when Aunt Victoria was finished with her, she would regret every single decision that had brought her to this moment. The phone call that would expose Linda's true nature and bring justice to our family was about to begin. Aunt Victoria answered on the second ring, her voice carrying the same authoritative tone that had intimidated countless defendants in federal courtrooms across the country. Even though it was Saturday evening, she sounded alert and focused, ready to tackle whatever crisis had prompted my unexpected call. When I explained what had happened, the silence that followed was more terrifying than any explosion of anger could have been. "Sarah, I need you to listen to me very carefully," she said, finally, her prosecutorial instincts immediately taking over. "Don't say another word to Linda about this conversation. Don't let her know you've contacted me. Act as normal as possible until I can get there tomorrow morning. Can you do that?" The drive from Portland to Seattle had never felt longer. Aunt Victoria arrived at our house at 8:30 the next morning, carrying a leather briefcase that I knew contained the tools of her trade. She had requested that Dad and I meet with her privately before confronting Linda, and we gathered in Dad's home office while Linda was out running what she claimed were urgent errands related to her real estate business. Aunt Victoria's approach was methodical and thorough. She began by documenting everything we knew about the missing jewelry, creating a detailed inventory that included photographs, insurance appraisals, and the provenance of each piece. She explained that establishing the value and ownership history would be crucial for any legal proceedings that might follow.
Elder abuse and theft from vulnerable adults carries serious penalties, she told Dad, her expression grave. The fact that Linda gained access to these items through marriage and a position of trust makes this case particularly egregious. We're not just talking about simple theft here. This could constitute organized fraud if she planned this from the beginning. The possibility that Linda's entire relationship with Dad had been orchestrated as an elaborate con game was devastating to consider. Had she targeted him specifically because of his wealth and recent loss? Had her grief counseling attendance been a hunting ground for vulnerable widowers? The questions multiplied with each passing moment, creating a web of deception that seemed to extend far beyond the missing jewelry. When Linda returned from her errands, she seemed surprised to find Aunt Victoria in our living room. I introduced them casually, explaining that my aunt had been in town for business and had stopped by for a visit. Linda's demeanor remained friendly, but I noticed subtle changes in her behavior. She kept checking her phone, mentioned several times that she needed to return calls to clients, and seemed eager to end the social interaction. Aunt Victoria was masterful in her approach, engaging Linda in seemingly innocent conversation about her real estate career, her daughter in California, and her adjustment to married life. To an untrained observer, it might have appeared to be nothing more than polite family small talk. But I could see that every question was carefully calculated to gather information and assess Linda's credibility. Sarah mentioned that you've been helping Robert organize some of Elena's belongings, Aunt Victoria said, her tone conversational but her eyes sharp. That must be emotionally challenging work. How do you decide what to keep and what to let go? Linda's response was telling. She launched into a detailed explanation about the importance of not holding on to material possessions that served no practical purpose, emphasizing how liberating it could be to clear out clutter and focus on the present rather than dwelling on the past. Her words revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of the difference between clutter and treasured family heirlooms. I imagine some items have more sentimental value than others. Elena's jewelry collection, for instance. Those pieces have been in our family for generations. The flicker of panic that crossed Linda's face was brief but unmistakable. She quickly recovered, agreeing that such items were indeed special and should be handled with extra care. But her body language had changed noticeably. She was fidgeting with her wedding ring, avoiding direct eye contact, and speaking slightly faster than normal. After about 30 minutes of this careful interrogation, Aunt Victoria excused herself to take a phone call, leaving Linda alone with Dad and me. The moment she stepped outside, Linda's mask began to slip. She complained about feeling interrogated, questioned why my aunt was asking so many personal questions, and suggested that perhaps it was time for the family visit to end. "She's a prosecutor, isn't she?" Linda asked, her voice tight with anxiety. "I can tell. She has that way of asking questions like she's building a case about something." Dad confirmed Aunt Victoria's profession, explaining that she specialized in financial crimes and fraud cases. Linda's face went pale, and she mumbled something about needing to check on her office before disappearing upstairs to the master bedroom. Within minutes, I could hear her moving around frantically, opening drawers and closets as if searching for something. When Aunt Victoria returned from her call, she took one look at our expressions and immediately understood that the dynamic had shifted. She nodded towards the stairs, where Linda's footsteps could still be heard overhead, then motioned for Dad and me to follow her outside to the garden where we could speak privately.
"She's destroying evidence," Aunt Victoria said without preamble. "Classic behavior when someone realizes they're under investigation. We need to act quickly before she has a chance to cover her tracks completely." The confrontation that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Aunt Victoria's transformation from pleasant family visitor to federal prosecutor was swift and absolute. When Linda came back downstairs carrying a small overnight bag and claiming she needed to drive to her office to handle an emergency, Aunt Victoria blocked her path to the front door. "Linda, we need to discuss Elena's jewelry collection," she said, her voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in courtrooms. "Specifically, we need to discuss where those items are right now and how you gained access to them." Linda's attempt to maintain innocence crumbled under Aunt Victoria's systematic questioning. Within minutes, the elaborate stories about safety deposit boxes and protective measures had been completely dismantled. Faced with someone who understood exactly how to break down false alibis and expose lies, Linda abandoned her pretense and admitted that she had sold the jewelry. "I needed the money," she said, tears streaming down her face and what appeared to be genuine panic rather than grief. "I have debts you don't understand. I was going to replace everything before anyone noticed. This wasn't supposed to hurt anybody." But Aunt Victoria wasn't interested in Linda's financial problems or her intentions. She wanted facts. Where had the jewelry been sold? Who had purchased it? What documentation existed of these transactions? Did Linda have receipts, contact information, or any way to trace where the family heirlooms had gone? The answers Linda provided painted a picture of someone who had acted impulsively and carelessly, without considering the consequences of her actions. She had taken the jewelry to a cash-for-gold business in a strip mall across town, a place that specialized in quick transactions with minimal paperwork. The owner had paid her significantly less than the items were worth, but the transaction had been completed in cash with no questions asked. "You sold century-old family heirlooms to a pawn shop?" Dad's voice was hollow with disbelief. "Pieces that were irreplaceable, that carried the history of 4 generations of women in our family?"
Linda's justification was stunning in its selfishness. She claimed that keeping old jewelry locked away served no purpose, that the pieces weren't being worn or enjoyed, and that converting them to cash was actually a more practical use of their value. She seemed genuinely unable to understand why Dad and I were so upset about what she characterized as a simple business transaction. Aunt Victoria's response was swift and merciless. She explained that Linda had committed multiple felonies, including theft, fraud, and elder abuse. The fact that she had gained access to the jewelry through marriage didn't give her legal ownership or the right to dispose of property that belonged to Dad and his family. The emotional manipulation and breach of trust elevated her crimes to levels that would likely result in significant prison time.
She had created this situation through her criminal actions, and she would be held responsible for fixing it, regardless of the personal cost or inconvenience involved. The phone call to the Cash for Gold business was devastating. The owner, a gruff man who clearly dealt with desperate people on a regular basis, confirmed that he had purchased a collection of vintage jewelry from Linda 3 days earlier. But when asked about the current location of those pieces, his response crushed any hope of easy recovery. Most of the jewelry had already been broken down for its component materials. The gold had been melted and sold to refineries, the gemstones had been removed and resold to various buyers, and the historical craftsmanship that had made each piece unique and irreplaceable had been destroyed forever. Great-grandmother Sophia's sapphire earrings, the ones she had carried from Italy and treasured for decades, had been reduced to raw materials worth a fraction of their sentimental value. A few pieces remained intact, items that the dealer thought might have resale value to collectors. But even these were scattered, sold to different customers whose contact information the dealer was reluctant to provide. The process of tracking down individual buyers would be time-consuming, expensive, and might not be successful even with extensive effort. Dad's reaction to this news was heartbreaking. The man who had been so careful to preserve Mom's memory, who had honored her wishes about keeping the family collection intact, now faced the reality that generations of family history had been casually destroyed for quick cash. The physical connection to his wife, his mother-in-law, and the women who had shaped his family's identity was gone forever. Linda's response to Dad's anguish was perhaps the most revealing moment of the entire confrontation. Instead of expressing remorse or taking responsibility for the pain she had caused, she became defensive and angry. She accused Dad of caring more about dead people's belongings than about their living relationship. She complained that she felt like a stranger in her own home, surrounded by shrines to a woman who would never come back. "Elena has been dead for 3 years," she said, her voice rising with frustration. "When are you going to stop treating her like she's still here? When are you going to start building a life with me instead of trying to preserve a museum to your first wife?" The cruelty of these words, spoken in front of me and my aunt, revealed the true nature of the woman who had spent 2 years pretending to honor Mom's memory. Linda had never respected our family's traditions or understood the importance of preserving connections to the past. She had seen the jewelry collection as an obstacle to her own comfort and control, not as treasured heirlooms that deserve protection. Aunt Victoria's legal strategy began taking shape immediately. She contacted her colleagues in the local prosecutor's office, explaining the situation and requesting that charges be filed against Linda for theft, fraud, and elder abuse. She also began researching the Cash for Gold business, suspecting that their willingness to purchase obviously valuable antique jewelry without proper documentation might indicate other illegal activities. These businesses are supposed to follow specific protocols when dealing with precious metals and gemstones, she explained to Dad and me. The fact that they accepted such a large collection without verifying ownership or requiring proper identification suggests they may be operating outside legal boundaries. If that's the case, we might be able to recover more than you'd expect. While Aunt Victoria worked her legal contacts, I took on the heartbreaking task of contacting the insurance company that had covered Mom's jewelry collection. The agent I spoke with was sympathetic but clear about the limitations of our coverage. Theft by a spouse or family member was specifically excluded from our policy, meaning that the financial loss would have to be absorbed entirely by our family. The insurance exclusion was particularly painful because it highlighted how completely Linda had betrayed the trust Dad had placed in her. When he married her, he had updated his insurance policies to include her as a beneficiary and co-owner of certain assets. In doing so, he had inadvertently created a loophole that allowed her to steal from the family without triggering insurance protection. Meanwhile, Linda's behavior became increasingly erratic and desperate. She alternated between tearful apologies and angry justifications, sometimes within the same conversation. She begged Dad to forgive her while simultaneously arguing that her actions hadn't really harmed anyone. She promised to find ways to recover the jewelry while complaining that our expectations were unrealistic and unfair. Her attempts to manipulate the situation grew more elaborate as the legal pressure intensified.
She claimed to have contacted lawyers who told her that her actions weren't actually criminal, that married couples had shared ownership of all property, and that prosecution would be difficult to pursue. But when Aunt Victoria demanded to speak with these alleged attorneys, Linda became evasive and couldn't provide contact information. "She's buying time," Aunt Victoria observed after another frustrating conversation with Linda. "She's hoping that if she delays long enough, you'll give up and accept the loss rather than pursuing criminal charges. It's a common strategy among white-collar criminals who think they can wear down their victims through attrition." The investigation into Linda's background revealed information that made our situation even more disturbing. Aunt Victoria's contacts in law enforcement discovered that Linda had been married twice before her relationship with her deceased husband. Both previous marriages had ended in divorce, with court records showing disputes over property division and allegations of financial misconduct. More troubling was the pattern that emerged from these earlier relationships. In each case, Linda had targeted men who were financially secure but emotionally vulnerable due to recent losses or major life transitions. She had a documented history of using romantic relationships to gain access to assets, then finding ways to extract value before moving on to new targets. "Your father wasn't her first victim," Aunt Victoria told me during a private conversation. "She's been running the same con for years, just getting better at it with each relationship. The grief counseling, the patient courtship, the respectful behavior toward family traditions, all of it was carefully calculated to gain trust and access." This revelation transformed our understanding of everything that had happened over the past 2 years. Linda hadn't simply made a desperate decision to steal jewelry when faced with financial pressure. She had planned and executed a long-term fraud scheme, targeting Dad specifically because his recent loss and substantial assets made him an ideal victim. The realization that Dad had been systematically manipulated and deceived was almost as painful as the loss of the jewelry itself. The woman he had trusted with his heart and his home had been studying him, learning his vulnerabilities, and positioning herself to exploit his grief for her own gain. Every moment of apparent happiness they had shared was now tainted by the knowledge that it had been built on lies. Dad's response to this information was a mixture of anger, embarrassment, and profound sadness. He felt foolish for having been deceived so completely, guilty for having allowed a criminal into our family, and heartbroken at the loss of what he had believed to be genuine love and companionship. The emotional manipulation had been so skillful that even now, knowing the truth, part of him struggled to reconcile the caring woman he thought he knew with the predator she had actually been. As the legal case against Linda developed, she made increasingly desperate attempts to avoid consequences. She hired an expensive attorney who specialized in defending white-collar criminals, someone who clearly understood the serious nature of the charges she was facing. Her legal team's strategy was to portray her as a woman who had made an honest mistake under financial pressure, not as a calculated criminal who had planned her crimes from the beginning. But Aunt Victoria's preparation was thorough and devastating. She had assembled evidence that demonstrated Linda's pattern of targeting vulnerable men, documented her systematic deception throughout the relationship with Dad, and established the significant financial and emotional harm caused by her actions. The case against Linda was so strong that even her expensive legal team began pushing for a plea bargain rather than risking a trial.
The recovery efforts for the jewelry yielded mixed results. A few pieces were located and returned, including Mom's engagement ring, which had been sold to a collector who was willing to sell it back at cost when he learned about the circumstances. But the majority of the collection was gone forever, destroyed in the process of extracting raw materials, or scattered to buyers who couldn't be traced. The financial cost of attempting to recover the stolen items was substantial, requiring private investigators, legal fees, and buyback payments that far exceeded the original value of the jewelry. But Dad was determined to retrieve whatever pieces could be found, regardless of the expense. The money didn't matter compared to the possibility of recovering even small parts of Mom's legacy. Linda's attempts to rebuild her relationship with Dad during this process were pathetic and transparent. She wrote lengthy letters explaining her actions, claiming that financial desperation had driven her to make terrible decisions that didn't reflect her true character. She begged for another chance, promising to spend the rest of her life making amends for the harm she had caused. These letters revealed the depth of Linda's self-deception about the nature of her crimes. She continued to minimize the significance of what she had done, characterizing the theft as a temporary borrowing that had gotten out of hand, rather than acknowledging the devastating violation of trust and family heritage she had committed.
Even facing serious criminal charges, she seemed unable to comprehend the full scope of her betrayal. Dad's response to Linda's pleas was clear and final. He had already begun divorce proceedings, seeking to protect whatever assets remained from further theft or manipulation. The woman he had loved and trusted was revealed to be a stranger who had never existed, a carefully constructed persona designed to exploit his grief and vulnerability. The house that had briefly felt like a home again after Mom's death now felt violated and unsafe. Linda's presence had contaminated spaces that held precious memories, turning the master bedroom where she had slept into a crime scene, transforming the jewelry room into a monument to theft and betrayal. The work of healing and reclaiming our family's sanctuary had only just begun. As winter approached, the legal case continued to build momentum. Aunt Victoria's contacts in federal law enforcement had begun investigating the cash for gold business that had purchased Mom's jewelry, discovering violations of precious metals regulations that could result in serious penalties. The possibility that criminal charges might extend beyond Linda to include the dealers who had enabled her crimes provided some hope for additional recovery. But the deeper work of processing the emotional devastation Linda had caused would take much longer to complete. Dad's faith in his own judgment had been shattered by the revelation that someone could deceive him so completely for so long. My trust in new relationships had been undermined by witnessing how expertly a predator could mimic genuine care and affection. The theft of Mom's jewelry was just the beginning of understanding how completely Linda had violated our family. As Aunt Victoria's investigation continued, we were about to discover that the missing heirlooms were only the tip of an iceberg of deception that extended far deeper than any of us had imagined. Linda had seriously underestimated the consequences of stealing from a family that included a federal prosecutor. She was about to learn that some crimes carry prices that extend far beyond anything she had calculated when she decided to target our family. The war for justice was just beginning, and Linda was about to discover that she had picked the wrong family to deceive. The turning point came on a gray February morning when Aunt Victoria called with news that would change everything. Her investigation into the cash for gold business had uncovered something far more significant than we had dared to hope. The shop wasn't just operating with questionable practices. They were running a sophisticated stolen goods operation that had been under federal surveillance for months. Sarah, they've been buying stolen jewelry from multiple sources and shipping it overseas to avoid detection, Aunt Victoria explained, her voice crackling with excitement. The FBI has been building a case against them for international trafficking of stolen goods. Linda's transaction was captured on their surveillance cameras, and her jewelry is documented in their evidence files. The federal investigation had gathered extensive evidence of the shop's illegal operations, including detailed photographs and documentation of every item they had processed over the past year. Mom's jewelry collection was clearly visible in their records, cataloged with identifying marks and characteristics that proved its authenticity and origin. The pieces that had been broken down for raw materials were documented before their destruction, providing irrefutable evidence of what had been lost. More importantly, the federal agents had recovered a significant cache of stolen goods that the shop had been preparing to ship overseas. Among these items were 3 pieces from Mom's collection that had been deemed too distinctive to break down immediately. Great-grandmother Sophia's sapphire earrings, the pearl necklace from Grandma Maria, and Mom's emerald bracelet had been preserved intact, waiting in federal evidence storage for the conclusion of the criminal case. The shop owners are facing serious federal charges for running a criminal enterprise. They're already talking about plea bargains and cooperation agreements. When they realize that helping us recover the jewelry could reduce their sentences, I expect full cooperation with our recovery efforts. The news that some of Mom's most precious pieces might be returned to our family was overwhelming. I had accepted that the jewelry was lost forever, destroyed in the pursuit of quick cash, with no regard for its historical significance. The possibility that the most meaningful items might actually come home felt like a miracle, born from the ashes of betrayal. Meanwhile, Linda's legal situation was deteriorating rapidly. Her expensive attorney had been pushing for a plea agreement that would result in minimal jail time and restitution payments. But Aunt Victoria's evidence of her criminal pattern and the federal investigation into the stolen goods operation had strengthened the prosecution's position considerably. The charges against Linda had been upgraded to include participation in a criminal enterprise and interstate transportation of stolen goods. She's looking at serious federal time now, Aunt Victoria explained during one of our strategy meetings.
The local theft and elder abuse charges were just the beginning. Once the federal prosecutors realized she was connected to this larger operation, they decided to make an example of her. Linda's reaction to the escalating charges was a mixture of panic and rage. She had clearly expected to negotiate a favorable plea deal that would allow her to avoid significant consequences for her actions. The realization that she was now facing years in federal prison rather than months in county jail had shattered her composure completely. Her attempts to contact Dad directly had become increasingly desperate and manipulative. She sent letters claiming that federal prosecutors were overreaching, that she was being used as a scapegoat for crimes committed by the cash for gold business, and that the charges against her were disproportionate to her actual wrongdoing. She begged Dad to intervene on her behalf to provide character witness testimony that might help reduce her sentence. Dad's response to these pleas was firm and final. He'd already provided a detailed victim impact statement to federal prosecutors, describing not just the financial harm Linda had caused, but the emotional devastation of her betrayal. The woman who had shared his bed and his life for 2 years had systematically deceived him, stolen irreplaceable family treasures, and violated every principle of trust and respect that made relationships possible. "I can't save you from the consequences of your own choices," Dad wrote in his final letter to Linda. "You targeted my grief, exploited my loneliness, and stole from my family. The fact that you're facing serious charges is the natural result of serious crimes. I won't be providing character references for someone whose character has been revealed to be fundamentally dishonest." The federal trial proceeded swiftly once Linda's attorney advised her to accept a plea agreement rather than risk even harsher penalties at trial. The evidence against her was overwhelming, documented by surveillance footage, financial records, and testimony from multiple victims who had been targeted by similar schemes over the years. Her pattern of targeting vulnerable men and systematically stealing from them had been thoroughly established by Aunt Victoria's investigation. Linda's sentencing hearing was held on a spring morning in the federal courthouse downtown. Dad chose not to attend, feeling that witnessing her punishment wouldn't provide the closure he needed to move forward. But I was there, along with Aunt Victoria, to represent our family's interests and to ensure that the judge understood the full scope of harm Linda had caused. The judge's comments during sentencing were particularly pointed. She noted that Linda had not only committed theft, but had violated the sacred trust that forms the foundation of marriage and family relationships. The systematic nature of her deception, combined with her targeting of vulnerable individuals dealing with grief and loss, demonstrated a level of calculated cruelty that warranted significant punishment. Mrs. Patterson has shown a pattern of predatory behavior that spans multiple relationships and many years, Judge Morrison stated. She has used intimate relationships as hunting grounds for financial exploitation, showing no regard for the emotional devastation she causes her victims. The sentence must reflect not only the financial harm, but the profound breach of trust that characterizes these crimes. Linda received 8 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. She was also ordered to pay full restitution for the value of the stolen jewelry, plus additional damages for the emotional harm caused to our family. The financial judgment would follow her for the rest of her life, ensuring that any future assets she acquired could be seized to satisfy the debt she owed to her victims. Watching Linda led away in handcuffs provided a sense of justice, but not the satisfaction I had expected. The woman who had caused so much pain looked smaller and more pathetic than threatening as she faced the consequences of her actions. The real victory wasn't seeing her punished, but knowing that she would never again be able to target another vulnerable family the way she had targeted ours. The recovery of Mom's jewelry from federal evidence storage was an emotional milestone that marked the beginning of true healing for our family. Aunt Victoria had worked tirelessly with federal agents and prosecutors to ensure that the pieces could be returned to us as quickly as possible once the criminal case was concluded. When I held great-grandmother Sophia's sapphire earrings for the first time since discovering they were missing, the weight of their significance overwhelmed me. These weren't just precious stones and metal, they were tangible connections to the strong women who had shaped my identity, surviving links to a heritage that Linda had tried to destroy for quick cash. Mom's emerald bracelet looked exactly as I remembered it, with the tiny scratch near the clasp where she had accidentally caught it on a door handle years ago. That small imperfection, which might have reduced its monetary value, made it infinitely more precious because it carried the story of Mom's daily life and the small accidents that make up a lifetime of love. The pearl necklace from Grandma Maria had been carefully preserved by the federal agents, stored in protective wrapping that maintained its lustrous beauty. When I fastened it around my neck for the first time, I could almost feel the presence of the generations of women who had worn it before me, their strength and love flowing through the cool touch of the pearls against my skin. Not everything was recovered. The gold locket with my baby photo had been destroyed, along with several other pieces that had been broken down for their raw materials. But the most historically significant items, the ones that carried the deepest emotional meaning, had been saved through the fortunate timing of the federal investigation. Dad's reaction to holding Mom's engagement ring again was heartbreaking and beautiful. He sat in his favorite chair, turning the ring over in his hands as tears streamed down his face. The simple platinum band with its modest diamond represented not just his love for Mom, but his commitment to preserving her memory and protecting the family legacy they had built together. "She would be so proud of how you fought for this," he told me, his voice thick with emotion. "Your mother always said that you had the strength to protect what matters most. I think she would be amazed at how fierce you became when someone threatened our family." The process of rebuilding our family's sense of security and trust took much longer than the legal proceedings. Dad struggled with guilt and embarrassment about having been so thoroughly deceived, sometimes questioning his judgment in ways that broke my heart. The man who had always been my rock needed reassurance that Linda's skilled manipulation wasn't a reflection of his weakness or naivete. "She was a professional predator," Aunt Victoria reminded him during one of her visits. "She had years of practice perfecting her techniques. The fact that she fooled you doesn't make you gullible. It makes her a skilled criminal. Even experienced investigators can be deceived by people who specialize in manipulation."
I took an extended leave from my job in Portland to help Dad through the healing process and to work on reclaiming our family home from the contamination of Linda's presence. We spent weeks going through the house room by room, removing reminders of her occupation and restoring spaces to reflect our family's true character and values. The master bedroom required the most extensive renovation. Dad couldn't bear to sleep in the space Linda had shared, so we converted it into a library and reading room filled with Mom's favorite books and comfortable seating near the windows that overlooked her garden. Dad moved into what had been the guest room, transforming it into a peaceful sanctuary that reflected his own tastes rather than accommodating someone else's preferences. Mom's jewelry room was restored to its original purpose, with enhanced security features that would prevent any future theft. We installed a proper safe for the most valuable pieces and created a display area where the recovered items could be honored and appreciated, rather than hidden away. The room became a celebration of the women who had shaped our family, rather than a monument to loss. The establishment of the Elena Martinelli Memorial Scholarship at the nursing school where Mom had trained provided a positive outlet for channeling our family's experience into something meaningful for others. The scholarship was funded partly through the restitution payments Linda would make over the years, ensuring that her crimes would ultimately contribute to honoring Mom's legacy of caring for others. Dad's recovery from the betrayal was gradual but steady. He began attending a support group for victims of financial fraud, where he met other people who had been targeted by similar schemes. Sharing his experience with others who understood the unique shame and violation that comes with intimate betrayal helped him process the emotional aftermath of Linda's deception. "I thought I was done with love after your mother died," he told me one evening as we sat in Mom's garden watching the sunset. "Linda made me believe I could have that connection again. Even though it was false, it reminded me that I'm capable of opening my heart to another person. Someday, when I'm ready, maybe I'll find someone who deserves that trust." My own healing process involved learning to trust my instincts about people again. Linda's deception had been so complete that it made me question my ability to recognize authentic versus manipulative behavior in others. Therapy helped me understand that sophisticated predators are difficult to detect precisely because they specialize in appearing trustworthy and caring. The legal victory and jewelry recovery provided closure, but the real triumph was the way our family grew stronger through adversity. Aunt Victoria's fierce advocacy had shown me the power of having people who will fight for you when you're under attack.
Dad's resilience in facing the truth about Linda's betrayal demonstrated that love and trust can survive even devastating violations. The story of Linda's crimes and punishment spread through our community, serving as a warning to other families about the sophisticated tactics used by financial predators. Several people contacted us to share their own experiences with similar schemes, and Aunt Victoria began working with law enforcement agencies to develop educational programs about protecting vulnerable adults from romance scams. "Your case became a model for how to fight back effectively," she explained. "Most victims of these schemes never get justice because they don't know how to build a case or don't have access to the legal resources needed to pursue criminal charges. Your family's response sent a message that these crimes have serious consequences." 6 months after Linda's sentencing, I returned to my job in Portland with a new appreciation for the strength and resilience that runs in my family. The woman who had tried to destroy our legacy had inadvertently revealed the unbreakable bonds that connect us across generations. Mom's jewelry was safe again, but more importantly, the values and love it represented had proven stronger than any attempt to steal or destroy them. The final piece of healing came when I wore great-grandmother Sophia's sapphire earrings to my cousin's wedding later that year. As I danced with Dad at the reception, I felt the presence of all the women who had worn those earrings before me, their strength and love flowing through me to future generations who would inherit not just precious jewelry, but the fierce determination to protect what matters most.
Linda had thought she was stealing valuable objects that could be converted to cash. What she had actually tried to steal was irreplaceable, the tangible connections that bind families together across time and space. Her failure to destroy those bonds proved that some treasures are truly beyond the reach of even the most skilled thieves. Looking back, I realized that Linda's greatest mistake wasn't underestimating the value of what she stole or the legal consequences of her crimes. Her greatest mistake was underestimating the love that would fight to protect it. She learned too late that when you threaten a family's legacy, you awaken forces more powerful than any criminal scheme. The jewelry is home, where it belongs, safely protected for future generations. Linda is exactly where she belongs too, facing the consequences of her choices and learning that some families fight back. And our family is stronger than ever, bound together by shared adversity and the knowledge that love, when threatened, becomes a force that no predator can overcome. 2 years later, I stood at the altar as my maid of honor helped fasten great-grandmother Sophia's sapphire earrings for my wedding day. The man I was about to marry, Marcus, was someone I had met through the fraud victim support group where Dad and I both volunteered. He understood the importance of trust because he had learned to rebuild it after his own devastating experience with financial betrayal. Dad walked me down the aisle wearing Mom's wedding ring on a chain around his neck, a tribute to the love that had shaped him and the strength that had carried our family through its darkest moments. As he placed my hand in Marcus's, he whispered, "Your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become." The reception was held in Mom's garden, now more beautiful than ever after years of careful tending. The roses she had planted bloomed in brilliant colors around tables filled with family and friends who had supported us through every challenge. Aunt Victoria gave a toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes, celebrating not just my marriage but our family's triumph over those who had tried to destroy us. Sarah and her father taught us all that some things are worth fighting for, she said, raising her glass. They showed us that love is stronger than greed, that family bonds can't be stolen, and that justice, though sometimes delayed, always finds its way home. The wedding cake sat next to a display case containing Mom's recovered jewelry collection, each piece shining under the garden lights like stars that had found their way back to Earth. Guests admired the heirlooms throughout the evening, and I shared the stories behind each item, keeping alive the memories of the remarkable women who had worn them before me. Linda's restitution payments had been arriving monthly, slowly repaying the financial debt she owed our family. The money went directly into the Elena Martinelli Memorial Fund, which had grown to support dozens of nursing students who shared Mom's passion for caring for children. Linda's crimes had inadvertently created a legacy of healing that would continue long after her prison sentence ended. During the father-daughter dance, Dad and I swayed to the same song he had danced to with Mom at their wedding 30 years earlier. "She's here with us tonight," he said, gesturing toward the jewelry display and the garden that bloomed around us. "In every flower, every story, every moment of love that refuses to be destroyed." 6 months after my wedding, Dad surprised everyone by announcing his engagement to Margaret, a kind widow he had met at the community center where he volunteered teaching financial literacy to seniors. Their courtship had been slow and careful, built on friendship and shared values rather than the whirlwind deception Linda had used to manipulate him.
Margaret understood the importance of Mom's memory and the significance of our family traditions. She had her own collection of heirlooms from her late husband and children from her first marriage, creating a blended family that honored the past while embracing new possibilities. When they married in a simple ceremony surrounded by people who truly loved them, it felt like the final healing of wounds Linda had tried to inflict. The day Marcus and I learned we were expecting our first child, we visited Mom's grave together to share the news. I wore her pearl necklace and promised that our daughter would grow up knowing the stories of the strong women who had come before her. The sapphire earrings would someday be hers, along with the responsibility to protect and preserve the legacy they represented. Linda was released from federal prison after serving 6 years of her 8-year sentence, reduced for good behavior and cooperation with authorities in other fraud cases. She attempted to contact Dad once through a letter forwarded by her parole officer, claiming she had found religion and wanted to make personal amends for her crimes. Dad's response was brief and final. He had forgiven her for his own peace of mind, but forgiveness didn't require renewed contact or trust. Linda had served her debt to society, but she would never again be welcome in our family's life. Some bridges, once burned by betrayal, can never be rebuilt.
On the 5th anniversary of Mom's death, our extended family gathered for the annual memorial dinner we had established in her honor. The dining room table was set with her best china, and everyone wore pieces from their own family jewelry collections in tribute to the traditions she had taught us to value. My baby daughter, Elena Rose, slept peacefully in my arms, wearing a tiny gold bracelet that had been made from metal recovered during the federal investigation. Even the fragments of destroyed heirlooms had been transformed into new treasures that would carry forward the love and strength of generations past. Dad stood to offer the traditional toast, his voice strong and clear as he spoke about resilience, family, and the unbreakable bonds that connect us across time. Elena taught us that love leaves traces that can never be erased, he said. No thief can steal memories, no criminal can destroy the values that shape who we become. Our family is proof that what matters most cannot be taken from us. As glasses clinked around the table and stories flowed about Mom's impact on all our lives, I felt the deep satisfaction of knowing that her legacy was secure. The jewelry collection sat safely in its restored display case, but the real treasures were the lessons in courage, determination, and fierce loyalty that had carried us through our darkest hour. Linda had thought she was targeting an easy mark, a grieving widower with valuable assets and no one to protect him. Instead, she had discovered that some families are anything but helpless when threatened. She had learned that stealing from the wrong people carries consequences that extend far beyond anything she had calculated. The final chapter of our story wasn't about revenge or punishment, but about the power of love to heal, protect, and ultimately triumph over evil. Mom's jewelry was home where it belonged, our family was stronger than ever, and future generations would inherit not just precious heirlooms, but the knowledge that they come from people who never give up the fight for what matters most. That night, as I tucked little Elena into her crib and whispered the stories of her namesake and the remarkable women whose strength flowed through her veins, I smiled knowing that some legacies are truly eternal. Linda had tried to steal our past, but she had only succeeded in strengthening our future. What would you do if someone close to you betrayed your trust and stole your most precious family treasures? How far would you go to protect what means the most to you? Sometimes the people we least suspect are capable of the greatest betrayal, but sometimes families fight back harder than any criminal expects. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.